This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Congratulations! You've chosen conversations that dare, that go boldly where few will. I'm Harry Almey, and this is the Almey Alternative on Otago Access Radio. Hello. This is Harry Almey with the debut, the premiere episode of the Almey Alternative. And we've aimed big today, people. We have got for us today an individual who has been Minister for Agriculture, Biosecurity, Corrections, Food Safety, Land Information, Racing, Rural Affairs, Rural Communities, Tourism and State. Not entirely sure what that one means, but we'll get into it. He is the second longest serving Member of Parliament and would be the longest serving Member of Parliament if we didn't have you-know-who. But that's enough introducing from me. Why don't you say hi?
Kia ora, Damien O'Connor, was West Coast Tasman MP, Labour list MP now, and the Labour candidate for the Waitaki electorate. So great to be down in the southern part of the South Island, but Westport will always be my tūranga waiwai. That's where I was born, brought up, and still have family members there, but great to be in the south.
Fantastic. Thank you for coming on board, Damien O'Connor. I've got one big opening question for you. So you came into Parliament with the 1993 election, that's right?
I did, yes, a long time ago, and I didn't think I'd ever be still doing this now.
Yes, it's a long journey. The last of the class of 93, a big class.
It is indeed. There were 14 of us came in. We almost won, government back for Labour, and it was literally within a few hundred votes of Labour winning that. And in fact, Peter Tapsell then was invited to be the Speaker of the House to make sure that the government, that was the national government of the day that had just sneaked in, they had a majority that was kind of workable. So interesting times, and then of course it went to MMP. So I've seen a few things change. I've seen a few people come and go, and I guess, never having planned to be a politician in the first place. I had an adventure tourism company actually before I got into Parliament, so that had enough thrills and challenges. But Parliament and the opportunity, I guess, to contribute has been a consistent and constant challenge, which is what I like.
Fantastic. And you've heard it here first, folks. You'll never know what you end up doing. You might end up becoming a Member of Parliament. But yeah, just for a bit of context for the listeners at home, Labour in the 1990 election went to a quite devastating defeat, nearly lost more seats than they retained. But they nearly took it back in the 1993 election, got about 45 seats, where National just got a bare majority of 50. So you saw that election. Back then, did you think you could win it?
I don't think many of us did, but Mike Moore was the leader of the party. He ran a very slick campaign. It was bringing in some of the science that's taken for granted now around political science and campaigning. He applied that. It was very disciplined. We had phone calls every morning. There were some target seats. We did amazingly well. And it was within a whisker, as I say, a couple of internal issues that probably didn't help us. And, of course, after the election, we saw Mike was replaced with Helen Clark, which was, again, a fairly difficult time, particularly for all of us who were new MPs, and kind of a bit of a shock to us. But anyway, we moved on. Helen became, a first-class Prime Minister. And so I've seen, as I say, a few leaders come and go, a few different parliaments. And again, I guess I still get motivated. I'm just saying to a group last night, I turn on the radio about 6 o'clock every morning. By about 6:30, I'm angry, frustrated, determined to try and change things because they're not right at the moment.
Fantastic. A frustrated, determined candidate and repository of our parliamentary political history. Yes, saw 8 leaders of the Labour Party and 3 prime ministers.
I don't know. I should have sat down and done that myself. Well done. Good research, yes.
Yeah. We try our best on the Almey Alternative, but there's always something we don't catch. But how do you feel? What do you feel are Labour's chances this year? It's looking 1993 tight, isn't it?
I think we're in a better position than 1993. Similar situation, Labour was dumped out. The government embarked upon some pretty radical reforms then. Mother of all budget, Ruta Richardson was the finance minister, and she was quite ruthless. We're still suffering from some of those changes where benefits were cut. People were really, we had 1992, we had the Resource Management Act, and then we had the Employment Contracts Act through the 90s. So all of those things really hit lower income New Zealanders very, very hard, and we're still trying to recover from that. And Helen Clark Foundation actually put out a report about 1 or 2 weeks ago pointing that the disparities in wealth in this country have grown to be, among the top in what we would call the developed world. Hard to call it developed when you've got those disparities, and New Zealand almost leads the way on that, and I think it's something we should all be ashamed of.
And everyone, I think, should also check out that report. That sounds like an incredibly, incredibly interesting report.
Interesting and sad. We think we have an egalitarian country where everyone has equal opportunity. The reality is, if you're born into a situation, where your parents are struggling to pay the bills, you might be in a rural area or somewhere where you don't have access to support systems or agencies, then it's hard work for you to get ahead. And there will always be some star examples where people have done it, but for the vast majority, if you're born into lower income or into poverty, it's a very, very hard struggle.
And you clearly care very greatly. I can hear the feeling in your voice, and I don't presume that you're the same man as you were all those years ago, about 10 parliaments ago. But what is it that drew you to the Labour candidacy and the Labour Party in the first instance all those years ago?
Funnily enough, it's the dairy industry. And so the dairy industry has been based on, and I come from a dairy farm, and, my father was head of dairy section of Federated Farmers. So, was involved in dairy politics. But actually, the dairy industry is based on cooperatives. And cooperatives are people coming together to share the risks and share the rewards, and to ensure that they help one another get ahead. And indeed, the dairy industry has done really well. Fonterra is a very big cooperative. The same principles, of social equity, making sure that, you help one another. Some farmers are further from the factories than others, but they don't necessarily, get less for their milk. That's what those principles can be applied to our country, and we'll all be better off. But we've kind of been divided up in this kind of laissez-faire approach to, just let people make decisions and winner takes all, and all of that. That creates division. It creates uncertainty, disparities of wealth, disparities of opportunity. And that's not the country that people left, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Europe, all around the world to come and live in New Zealand. They came here because they saw opportunities, and most of them were shared among all New Zealanders.
Thank you for saying that. I had no idea that cooperatism was such a key part of the farmers' movement, because, of course, I know in the back of my head, my nerdy back of the head, that over in Britain, where some of these traditions came from, it's called the Labour and Cooperative Party. These things historically, internationally go hand in hand. Could you just explain for a little bit more what precisely a cooperative is and looks like?
So cooperative, we still have many of them across our economy here, and so you become often a supplying shareholder. So if you're a dairy farmer and you produce milk, then you supply that to a company. The company has an obligation to take that milk from you every day. It's quid pro quo. It's say sharing the risk, sharing the rewards. And so the dairy industry, in fact, Fonterra, when it was set up, had an obligation because it was covering about 95% or more of the milk in the dairy farmers in the country. Then if farmers wanted to go somewhere else, they didn't have an option. So we and I chaired the select committee for that legislation. We imposed upon Fonterra an obligation to pick up milk if farmers produce it, so they wouldn't tip it down the drain. And for that, Fonterra then was basically the dominant player in the market. They processed all that milk. They grew through economies of scale, and they have succeeded across the globe. There are some environmental issues associated with the growth of dairying in some areas. We've still got to address those. But it is our largest, biggest, most successful industry and company in this country. And so that's something we should celebrate. some farmers would like to forget the fact that it's a cooperative, but actually it's served them very, very well. And the principles of a cooperative are the principles of the Labour Party. And they don't like hearing that either, but that's the reality of it.
Fantastic. Well, that's very interesting about what farmers do and don't like to hear about the Labour Party. I've got a lot of people in Dunedin, in my experience, are a little bit insular. I've had the honour and the joy to go and play hockey for Milton High School Tocamarino High School out in Milton. Wonderful, lovely lads. But I remember getting into one conversation with them, and it was just an article of faith. They said, "Oh goodness, there's an election coming up. Labour will raise taxes and take on lots of debt." But your remit has been as a rural-based Labour MP. How do you do it?
Well, if you talk to honest farmers out there who've thought about it, actually they always do really well under a Labour government. Look, we set the structures up originally for the Dairy Board. We took off subsidies that were distorting the industry in the 80s. It was a hard process. We did the right thing. We set up Kiwifruit Marketing Board that then became Zespri. We set up Fonterra, the legislation for that. We've contributed in so many ways. We've spent about $800 million getting rid of Mycoplasma bovis. These were things that the national government sat on their hands, ignored Mycoplasma bovis, and we came in and committed to help that. We've done extraordinary things for the rural and agricultural sectors in this country. It's not generally recognised. I live with that reality, but I do like to remind them. And I think that, we're facing some challenges now, and it probably will take a Labour government to grasp the nettle and to show true leadership to get us into the next stage of evolution for agriculture across the world. It is around not just growing lambs and producing milk. It's around, fine quality nutrition for people who, want a better life. And I think there's huge opportunities there. At the moment, there's a lack of leadership across the agribusiness sector. Many have their heads in the sand, and they don't realise that the world is changing unless we change too. And to keep up with those market trends, we're going to be left behind by competitors like Ireland, like South America, even by the US, where they can produce a lot of the protein, sometimes with a lower carbon footprint, sometimes with it in more efficient ways. But we have a pasture-based system. It's amazing. It's driving our economy, and we've just got to make sure that we don't do it at the expense of people or the environment or our reputation.
And what you said at the beginning about those subsidies and $800 million investment, that was with the last Labour government? Because I'm sure you'll agree over your long career that one Labour government and one national government to the other is seeming increasingly different.
Look, it is, and through Helen Clark, as I say, the formation of Fonterra, then we saw, a lot of growth, and we put more money into biosecurity. A lot of positive things, again, and with Jacinda Ardern as Prime Minister, in spite of the challenges that were thrown at us, as I say, we effectively got rid of Mycoplasma bovis. We invested a huge amount into agriculture, to progress things like a bit of regenerative agriculture, get the organic standards in place. Actually, we worked with the fertiliser companies to make sure that, we had more efficient use of fertiliser, and that we were mindful of the issues around nitrates in the waterways, around animal welfare standards that were starting to kind of come up and bite us, and they still are, some of those. A lot of progress has been made, but unless we improve in some of those areas, we're likely to be exposed. Everything we do, regardless of what industry we're in now, is open to international exposure. That is, someone with a cell phone can tell a story true or not. And of course, if they tell a false story, we have to be able to actually correct that and verify what we do and prove that we are some of the best farmers in the world.
I hardly need ask why you are named spokesperson for the regional development and for trade. You're just so neatly knitting those two things together. But amongst all these various things that you're saying we need to do and have done, just looking back on your career, you've served under 3 prime ministers as a minister. What would be the single most thing that you would name now as the thing you were most proud of as an achievement? Look,
I've not gone through and done that. A few people ask that, and it's hard. I think it's great that we embarked upon a campaign, a program of eradication for Mycoplasma bovis. If that was still in the country running rampant, we would have a completely different and less efficient dairy industry. So that's really important. For the West Coast, I negotiated $120 million to go into a fund for ongoing regional development in the area. And that at a local level, it was important we helped develop the tourism industry in a region to give us more diversification. We actually had an independent dairy company too, which was, $800 million gross turnover. Unfortunately, it got into trouble and it's now been sold. A Chinese company, Yili, owns it, still operating a dairy industry. That was a sad, I guess, I don't take responsibility for that, but having been MP and watching that was very, very sad. So look, there are many positives and negatives. You try and do your bit. There are some people we helped into a house or we got access to some mental health services. They are just as important. And so with my staff, great team, we've done lots of little and big things to try and help the West Coast Tasman electorate, but also at a national level, I guess through Cabinet, being part of a team that's done achieved an incredible amount. The Superannuation Fund, KiwiSaver, all those things with Michael Cullen, they're serving this country very, very well.
Oh, KiwiSaver, that's a sore topic for people of my generation with recent changes. But just going back to the start of what you were saying, just for listeners at home who might not be so clued in, what was that mycoplasm? What was it?
Mycoplasma bovis, which was a disease that was brought in. It's pretty rife around the world, and it affects cows. They react to it in different ways, but it means that when they're under stress, they can have mastitis, they can slip the calf and have abortions and all sorts of stuff that would have severely impacted the way that we manage our animals across pasture-based systems. And so anyway, we got rid of it. At this point, we're still monitoring to make sure that the disease has been eradicated, but there's about another 3 years to monitor. And if we don't find any of it, we can declare ourselves Mycoplasma bovis free. And that's one thing, but more importantly, farmers can get on and do what they do best.
That sounds like it would be a happy day, listeners. It would be a happy day to declare ourselves free of that. But it's very interesting to hear you also mention in your previous part about regional development. My background is as a history student, so I've been really digging into the archives, digging into the ODT, and I found back in the time of David Longley's time that regional development was a lot more of a hot topic. People were talking a lot more about regional development, and I can find less and less about it. Where is regional development at the moment as a portfolio and in the Labour Party? Is it still relevant?
It's very it's a very important issue. It's kind of mixed up with economic development now, and the boundaries are kind of blurred. So if you go back to the 80s where we saw massive job losses, we had high levels of unemployment, and it was at grassroots level, and I was part of a Buller Community Development Company. We set this up to try and grasp ideas and a little bit of money that was around from the government to turn it into job opportunities. We bought the odd company, created a new company. I remember travelling to Dunedin to look at fertiliser production from waste products. The long and short of it is it was a desperate need to get jobs underway, and from people who had lost jobs from restructuring. That's been carried through, and then there's an ongoing, I guess, discussion, if not debate, around whether government should lead or facilitate or just ignore economic development and what that means now is it's not just businesses, it's ensuring that the infrastructure is in place to allow the business to operate efficiently. So it shifts over time. You have investment in infrastructure, then you're looking to bring companies in to create jobs and to take you to the next stage. And each region is looking has an advantage for some reason or another. Queenstown clearly has the remarkables and the spectacular scenery there with Lake Wakatipu, and tourism is their big advantage. And so they're looking to diversify them and Wanaka into, say, film industry, where you have the West Coast is based on mining and farming, fishing, so trying to extract more value from those sectors, some of which are extractive, is a different challenge from, say, Auckland, where you've got massive housing and infrastructural challenges there. Each region is different. From a central government perspective, you've got to use your resources to assist in the most efficient way at the moment. There's a lot of money being thrown at regions through Shane Jones's as operations. Some of that money is well spent, some of it not. And we've just got to make sure that when we use taxpayers' money to assist with regional development, which again is infrastructure, it's around supporting companies, but then making sure you have good quality jobs that are well paid. So very complex. Most countries in the world that have succeeded, and if you look to Scandinavian countries, they've been very proactive in trying to identify with the private sector opportunities and working alongside them, and that's what we'll do.
There we go. Damien O'Connor has stolen all of my thunder. He said mining and he said Shane Jones. I can't bring anything up. So yes, for listeners at home, I believe what you'd say is the opposite number in the regional portfolio is Damien O'Connor versus Shane Jones. Shane Jones is the current Minister for Regional Development, if that's the correct title as it is. Where would you say is your key sort of dividing line in how regional development should be done between yourself and Shane Jones in the House of Commons? No, House of Representatives.
Yes, I've worked with Shane. He's been a Labour minister and comes from a region, so kind of understands the needs of it. But he's taken an approach which is a little too Trumpian in my view, and he's very bright and he's kind of very loose with some of the wording, and offends a lot of people. Look, I think underlying all of that, we need to, we're all trying to create good jobs, although we want to protect the rights of workers, and I have to say the coalition government seems to be ignoring them. So they just want jobs as numbers on the paper. We want jobs as an opportunity to support your family and have a worthwhile career and create a better New Zealand. It's not just a temporary opportunity for a bit of income, which is what this government seems to be kind of considering by way of jobs. If you go back to the mining issue, and I come from the West Coast, and that's certainly been the history and still is a big part of the industry, there's a truism, if you don't grow it, you mine it. And so you have to think about that. It's true. Most of the things that surround us come from mining or they've been grown. We're into recycling more, using those minerals or whatever from mining more efficiently, which is great. But you do come back to the ongoing requirement to do that. And we've learned over the years to do it in a more environmentally friendly way. Now, the fast track, and we had a fast track process post-COVID, but it had a strong environmental oversight. So, you can move through some of the bureaucratic hurdles, but you still had to meet the very high standards of environmental, which combined with community objectives as well. This coalition government seems to have removed that and dig baby dig or whatever Shane's wanted to say has kind of pushed that to one side. Now, it's not gone completely. Take the Santana mine. There's a fast-track committee looking at it. I wouldn't say they're ignoring the environmental issues, but they're probably not the highest objective when it comes to, long-term impacts. And so that is a danger. We do not support the fast-track process when it comes to complex projects like that. And so that's where we divide. I guess that you asked a question. We've still got to take a longer term objective to everything we do in our country. Too much of what we do is short term. People might say it's because of a 3-year political cycle. Actually, it's more than that. It's a fact. It's hard to get businesses to look long term. The world is changing. It's disrupted all the time. But you've got to have that long-term objective and still be flexible enough to adjust to the disruptions that are going to occur, like it or not.
So if I was to sum what you've put forward for the listeners there, you don't support the fast-track process, but you're not completely anti-mining or some sort of throw-out jargon. It's more sort of like a careful ecological sort of planning to underpin any mining project.
Look, we do have minerals. We're not a small country, but relative to the other big mining nations, South America, you've got Australia, we have smaller deposits of whatever we have. And there's a deposit of uranium in the middle of the Buller Gorge. I don't think anyone's intending to mine that. And when they found it, it was a very small amount relative to what they've found in Australia. So they've got on and done that. So we will find minerals all through, a lot of it in the conservation area. And so then you have to weigh up the relative merits of mining it here or getting it from somewhere where it's more efficient. We don't want to shift the environmental impacts offshore, if there are, and there are some regimes that are doing it with little or no consideration for the environment or for labour, and we've got to avoid where we can taking minerals from that unsustainable and unethical mining practice. Generally, what we have here is better than that. But again, you have to weigh up each project. One of the questions I've always asked of the mining industry, what are the long-term impacts? And I think that the West Coast is still suffering from rates that are high, infrastructure that's old and inadequate, because the mining industry didn't leave enough behind on the West Coast, and that has to change.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Just taking us a bit back further into history, I described you as the opposite number of Shane Jones, but he's minister, you're spokesperson. Why on earth aren't you shadow minister for regional development? It confuses me to the end of the earth. I know that started, I believe, under Jenny Shipley's shadow cabinet, but why that change? Why can't we say, right, he's going to be the future Minister of Defence with certainty?
Look, we I guess we've not used that terminology. It does come up, and and depending on who's talking to you or talking about you, they might use that. But I guess we've just evolved our own terminology in an MMP environment. Actually, it's harder to predict who might be in that position because you've got to negotiate them. So spokesperson for is a simpler way of doing that, and so you learn as you go, and people call you lots of worse things than spokesperson. So I don't mind. As long as it's kind of semi-respectful, that's useful.
Restraining my laughter over here. Fantastic. You said quite early in the start of the interview you didn't expect to be going this long. And of course, when you got into Parliament, that was sort of the era of a complete sort of wash of parliamentary politics, especially with the Labour Party. You had Clive Mathewson, Peter Dunoff to United. You had a leak to the ACT Party as well. So my question is, what's kept you going?
I guess every 3 years has been a new challenge, an interesting one. It got pretty hard work. 2008 to 2011, I won the seat back for Labour for West Coast Tasman, and 11 to 14 was kind of the hope that we might win after 2 terms, but it did get a bit depressing. That third term, 14 to 17, was hard work, and you saw the government of the day, John Key, selling down half the power companies. They were increasing the weight of the trucks on the road, and we were squeezing the road funding, and we're still paying the price of that now. So it was depressing and very tempting to leave, but I guess that we had some ructions within the Labour Party trying to work out who would be the leader, and I guess I just hung in there long enough to have Jacinda Ardern take over, and then I guess it was it was great time. It was very exciting. We had a lot of good things to do. We were thwarted a little bit by a number of different events, and if you go to Jacinda's film, Prime Minister, you'll see that was. It came at us from left field, and you have to be able to adapt to that. I think we did a pretty good job in the circumstances, and again, it was 6 years of exciting times, achieving a lot of really, really good things. But in the end, the Ukraine war in particular, it just added to the cost of living, and so people dealt to us.
It's interesting you say about the Ukraine war, because, I imagine it was a lot of fun as a minister, and a lot of those ministerial portfolios you've kept within the Labour shadow caucus, but the one you've gained quite recently in March is defence. Why particularly have you gained defence?
I guess I've been around long enough. It's a very complex portfolio. It's a very expensive one. We spend a lot of money on defence. The perception has been that, Labour doesn't know about defence. Actually, we've always invested money as we needed to bring defence forces back up to speed, because often they'll run down under national, in spite of what they will say. And you've got complex procurement challenges. I don't know why we keep buying dumb stuff, but I've watched that happen time and time again. The world is changing, and I guess we've been confronted in government with a couple of challenges. Should we go to Iraq or not? We said no. We judged that war not to be smart, not to be ethical, and indeed we were right. So we always have to, as a government, be connected closely to defence, know what we stand for, know when we're prepared to stand up, and making sure that the Defence Force is capable of doing what people expect of it. And, I've just looked under the bonnet over the last couple of months. And I'm a bit concerned to where we've got to, where our in-house capability has been shrunk to the point where we rely so much on contractors. It's a bit of an international experience, but if you have a defence force where the truck breaks down and you've got to call up someone to fix it, then it's probably not what New Zealanders expect. And indeed, the people who are in the defence force are really great, but they've been kind of underpaid. Many have left. Their houses haven't been up to standard, so we've got to bring them up to standard. So these are all challenges. And while the current minister, or the former one, managed to promise this huge amount of funding into defence, I'm not sure the money's been appropriated. They don't have it. And so, false promises are not much good either. So we've got to look carefully at it. I think I've been around long enough to probably just take a wise approach to it, which is what it does need.
Fantastic. And this is something I definitely want to unpack a little bit more, because here on the Almey Alternative, we like to talk about things that people aren't talking enough about. I hear no one talking about defence, and I think defence has a weird place within New Zealand's political geography. It's much more of a hot issue in other countries. So my question is, what is a wiser approach? I dare ask what your policy would be, but of course I know for listeners at home that the manifesto of the Labour Party isn't out and won't be out for a few weeks still.
No, and look, we're working carefully on that stuff. We have to know how much money. We're not going to promise billions of dollars for defence if we don't have it, or we don't know where we're going to get it from. It seems as though the government, the coalition, was able to promise all those things and give tax cuts, but not actually deliver the money. And so we're still waiting to see. Come back to us. Look, it's. As I say, it is important. We rely on the Defence Force, for major events, and we see that on a regular basis within our own country. We reach out to the Pacific. We have to help our neighbours when they need it. So a Defence Force that's naval capable, is essential. It can, has helicopters that work, has interoperability, and it's a kind of a trendy word where we can work with our neighbours, and of course with Australia that would be sensible. But when you ask some questions, there's a lot of areas where it just doesn't. We don't connect. It's technology, it's basic stuff. So if we can be more efficient and I guess purchase equipment alongside the Australians and share that, then that would be a sensible way forward. The other big dilemma is, if you go back, through the decades and the centuries, you've got warships and you've got the emergence of planes as being the key assets that are, really important. What we've seen, of course, over the last couple of years, a few years, is that drones now are critical components of any defence force, both, from an aggressive or defensive perspective. Excuse me. New Zealand produces some very smart drones. We've used them across agri-tech and stuff like that. Of course, then they can be adapted for military use. So these are some of the opportunities, challenges, call them what you like, that we have to face as we go forward. We've been very mindful of producing technology in our country that might, go into the hands of people who use it militarily for ill purposes, for evil purposes, call it what you like. And so I guess the production of drones and then can be used for our own defensive purposes, certainly for surveillance. We've got to look at those opportunities, and the absence of, a big fleet of warships doesn't mean that we don't have military capability now in the new world that we're facing. But we're an island nation. We have some unique challenges. We are a long way, which from a lot of the areas of tension, which means we've maybe been a bit casual or maybe haven't had to focus on it as much. I think, look, we are working and will continue to work with our partners to try and create a more peaceful world, not one that everyone has to spend more money on military at the expense of all the other things that we need to do, because that's what's happening around the world, and it's not a sustainable situation. And, we see some pretty evil actions across the globe at the moment, and we want to not contribute and exacerbate those situations. We want to kind of be independent and continue to advocate for peace and diplomacy as the best way forward.
You've spoken a bit about evil purposes once or twice, and while I haven't seen a great many sort of press releases on the Labour website from yourself, I have seen that you've made a little bit of a name for yourself with some parliamentary voting and speaking. When you say evil purposes, do you refer to the conflict between Palestine and Israel?
Well, it's not a conflict, it's a genocide.
Genocide, yes.
Yeah, it is, and that's an outrageous situation. I've never quite understood, how the evil that has been imposed upon, the Jewish people through the Second World War, how some might say it's not exactly the same. In fact, it's the same actions. It may not be on the same scale, but the consequences for the Palestinian people are the same, and it's just outrageous, and we should continue to advocate for that to stop, and we then have to work collectively across the globe to rebuild the homes and the place for the Palestinian people.
So I suppose that naturally brings me on to the question of, are you in your position, in your defence shadow portfolio, advocating for a different defence relationship between New Zealand and Israel?
I can't speak for that per se, and I can't say what the government currently has in terms of its relationship with Israel, but I think Israel is becoming, the IDF in particular, increasingly isolated across the globe. And it's the actions of the government and of the IDF, not all Jewish people. There are some wonderful Jewish people across the globe and in our country too are distraught about what is going on here. And so it is important, absolutely, that we differentiate between the actions of Netanyahu and the IDF and some extremists within the Israeli parliament and their actions around the world, not just in Gaza or the West Bank, but elsewhere, as we've seen.
No, definitely concerning. I describe them as a vile lot, some members of that parliament, some of their commentary, but certainly concerning. Being a List MP, that must be a big change for you. I mean, I know you've had like a spell previously in your parliamentary career, but being a List MP, how's that change been, going from an electorate MP to a List MP?
It is different. I've always, fought to be an electorate MP, and it's nice to have. It's not your patch, but I guess you have clear areas of responsibility, and you have a team. And while I still do have someone working for me in West Coast Tasman, and I'm shadow, I kind of am buddy MP, we call it. So I'm still there. I was there for 3 days. 4 days actually last week, going around catching up with people and talking. It is different. Your primary obligation, I guess, is to the party from an employment contract perspective. But my Tauranga Waiwai was always Westport, Bulla, and the West Coast and Tasman. I have a lot of people, a lot of friends up there. It enables me, I guess, as a List MP to get around other parts of the country with more legitimate freedom. That is, it's focused on the portfolio areas that I have, and I don't have to commit to, set sessions and programs within the electorate. You have fewer invitations, I guess, and you might say that's good, but actually, so you're not as connected to the community as I was. And that time is spent elsewhere in the country.
Yes, no, I'm not sure if many listeners will have met a List MP before. I've in fact met a former List MP who sort of complained of becoming a little bit invisible. Could you describe to the listeners at home what exactly is a buddy MP and how does a List MP sort of remain accountable? It's very clear the electorate, like the accountability between the electorate MP and their electorate, but perhaps not so clear for the listeners about List MPs.
No, and I guess that's an evolving science around MMP. We've had it since 1996, and List MPs are working out. Some of them have been constituent MPs like myself and know how to work within a community, set up a meeting, and kind of represent people in their views. And others may have come into Parliament and focused around Wellington and parliamentary process and not be as familiar with getting out into the community. But over time, any member of Parliament worth their salt will remain close to the community, and it might be based around issues, or it might be a geographical area such as a constituent MP. Other than that, I guess people just have to look at the people who, stand for Parliament. Those on the list are not probably as scrutinised as closely as the ones in electorates, but the party has a formal process of how they rank list MPs, and that ranking determines the likelihood of you getting into Parliament based on the list vote that we see at the end of the day from an election. So if you're further down the list, then the chances are you may not get into Parliament. So that it's not a perfect process, but it's as good as we can get it.
Gives you a bit of a push to put the party vote a little bit higher, though, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, most of us know that actually whether we get into government or not and can give effect to the policies that we talk about is determined by the list vote. And so people are, I think, getting to know the importance of that. But again, having someone you vote for in your local patch and being able to kick them out or vote them in is a core part of democracy, whereas the list thing seems a bit more vague, but actually is more important.
So this is slightly a paired question. The first is, how do you manage sort of campaigning and representing a large electorate, and how do you respond to Miles Anderson's sort of slightly pointed remark about you being a carpetbagger?
I mean, look, we've many people have moved around, and I appreciate it comes from here, and so I'm not pretending to be other than a West Coaster with some experience in Parliament, who's going to fly the red flag in Waitaki and say to people, well, if you want someone who will work as hard as I can and be here as much as I can, and I guess have some experience in getting your messages through into cabinet, then I'm your man. And but people will make those calls, and I think it's really important that people who might want to support Labor or question why they would have an opportunity to meet me, come to meetings, see us debating on the hustings, and make their call. That's a healthy democracy. And a vote for Labor is just as valuable in Omarama or Wanaka as it is in Auckland or Wellington Central, and so people shouldn't forget that. So it might seem like a traditional National Party seat, but there are many thousands of Labor voters here, and as long as they tick Labor, and they might tick O'Connor as well, that's part of a democratic process.
Fantastic, yeah. I imagine Miles Anderson was surprised to see he was going up against yourself in a seat that Labor hasn't won since 1987. How do you feel your chances are to win Waitaki?
I mean, a good friend David Parker won big parts of the electorate back in 2002, I think. So it has
more recently.
Been Labor. Yes, more recently. So never say never is something that we should all remember. And so look, a good, healthy contest is what every electorate deserves, and I guess the opportunity to be down south here means that I can do it. It will require a lot of driving, and I'm sure Miles and anyone in the big electorate knows that. You just got to drive, talk, meet, and carry on. I had two meetings yesterday, one in Geraldine, one in Oamaru, another one I caught up with some people in Timaru. So that's not in the electorate, but just part of a day's work and as a politician, I guess.
Certainly part of a day's work for MPs representing those ginormous electorates. I almost can't fathom the size of Waitaki in the West Coast, especially amidst the fuel crisis. So there we go, an MP who wants a job that involves lots of driving.
I guess I've grown up and got my licence, I think, about a week or two after I was 15, and have driven a lot. I guess it is a basic requirement to represent these big electorates, and so far I've been reasonably lucky to be able to continue to do that. So I'll keep working on that. You've got to focus. The roads are getting busier. The roads are rougher now because of you've got heavier trucks, and the maintenance hasn't kept up. And it's one of those things that I'm determined to try and shift, or at least get focus on, because as the roads get rougher, they get more dangerous, and with more traffic, more dangerous roads, then we'll see consequences through a road toll. And it's not what any party or any government wants, but you have to face up to the realities that if our infrastructure is not adequate, there are consequences.
Right, we're leaning in. We're in the last sort of 12, 13 minutes of the interview, so we're going to dedicate this time to the big questions. I sit around the coffee table, I chat with people, and when they're weighing up political parties, I'm often hearing people exclaim with a great deal of frustration, Labour, they don't stand for anything, which, putting my opinion aside, I thought this was a perfect question to put to you, someone who's surely seen the Labour Party change so much over the years, definitely no longer the party of Rogernomics, but what does Labour in the year 2026 stand for?
Well, it was set up on the West Coast, Denniston, Runanga, Blackball, for workers' rights. That is that people in power who had the capital thought they could just get people to come along and work for them and they could treat them in any way they liked. And, the risk of being fired and having no income was the threat that kept people working. That is simply unacceptable. And I guess the Labour Party was formed out of the union movement and standing up for workers' rights so that, every Kiwi has an opportunity to get ahead. And unless you have good laws to keep the balance between capital and labour in balance, or at least in the right proportion to ensure that, if you're a worker, you may have tertiary qualifications, you may have trades, or you may not. Ensuring that people who don't, for whatever reason, that they aren't simply cast out on the scrap heap. We've got to fight to ensure that civilization is judged on how we look after the most vulnerable, not how we look after the most lucky. And so that's where Labour will continue to fight. New things like environmental management, which you didn't think about in the early 1900s, now absolutely critical. We've got to incorporate the right amount of environmental management while we ensure that people have opportunities through jobs. We've got to make sure that we focus now on tertiary education. Wasn't part of the original movement for Labour, but clearly being able to have R&D, being able to move ahead and keep up with the rest of the world is really, really important. It is a complex world, and so the core values of ensuring opportunity for each and every New Zealander are there. If you are unlucky enough to be born with a disability, then we need to be able to step in through special education, through a health system that we all own, not simply say, well, privatise it. If you can afford it, you're okay. If you can't, tough. And you don't have to go very far around the world to see countries that run on that philosophy and that basis. And the US is, they're not all poor countries. The US is a very wealthy country, but it takes an approach to areas of health and social welfare that leave too many people destitute, poor, drug addicts. And, that disparity of wealth, disparity of opportunity and hope is not what our ancestors came here for. It's not what the Māori people want for the future of this country. We've got to work together, a bicultural nation, multicultural communities that we have are a wonderful opportunity, but doesn't just happen if you leave it to the market. And that's what this coalition government are doing. It's just leaving those decisions to the market. The market won't determine our future. It will seize opportunities from that future, not build a better one.
And to sum that for the listeners at home, Labour for the few, not the for the many, not the few. There we go. That's the other party.
I guess it's for everyone, and we have to accept that, we have entrepreneurs, and I had a small tourism business, and was from a farming background, but as I say, it comes back to my understanding of the success of cooperatives and Labour values. Where we work together, we succeed, and where we as individuals stand apart, there'll be some that will succeed, but there'll be a lot who don't. And as I say, we've got to look after those people to make sure that we have a healthy, vibrant country, not one where we've got growing numbers of people who can't get access to their basic needs. And that is the reality for too many Kiwis. We've got to turn that around and head back in the right direction, or head back in the correct direction. It's probably not the right, it's to the left. But, without getting into smart-ass comments, I guess that we need to ensure that the values that most people came to this country for can be maintained into the future. And
it's interesting to hear your emphasis on tertiary education and environmental issues, which I've also been surprised to hear from other members of Parliament from the Labour Party that I've bumped into. Have your clothes kind of been stolen on those issues by parties sort of to the left of you, or are Labour sort of front and centre on those issues?
We have to be the pragmatic ones. Politics is the art of the possible. We have governed in the past. We'll govern into the future. Smaller parties, of course, bring values and ideas, to a government through coalition. But what we've seen at the moment is where the central party, which you could argue is national, where they haven't held the line on their values, arguably. I'm not at kind of promoting their values, but they've been kicked around basically by New Zealand First and by ACT, who have different values and are certainly different values than the vast majority of New Zealanders, and that's where things get out of kilter. So we'll have coalition, perhaps with Te Pāti Māori, perhaps with the Greens, maybe with TOP, who knows. But it is important that we as the major party determine the direction of travel with some good ideas that minor coalition partners can bring to the government.
And you think Labour is a good, strong basis to not get kicked around in a hypothetical government that comes, whether that be... Do you see the next potential government as the next seventh Labour government, or as the sixth Labour government sort of in exile?
No, it's a seventh. It will be a new government, and I think we've shown in the past that in coalition, and we've brought parties alongside us that share our values and the direction of travel, and I think we've done it very successfully.
Fantastic. So we're coming into our last 5 minutes. So I'm going to give you this time for your last and final pitch, first to the voters of Waitaki, and just finally, generally, to potential list voters.
Look, I come here, I don't pretend to be, I live on the edges of Waitaki, and I bring some experience to a really complex role in some challenging times. I guess my background in agriculture and tourism and the other portfolios that I've learned along the way mean that I think I can have a pretty good understanding of the multitude of aspirations and challenges that an electorate like Waitaki and many others around the country face. Ultimately, it's teamwork that allows us to make progress, and I have to be able to work with my colleagues and coalition partners to get those positive outcomes. But I think the direction of travel that we're seeing from the coalition government is one that is unsustainable. I don't think New Zealanders, we're pretty nice and we're pretty kind of docile often. I don't think they will stand for too much more of this, where we see growing disparities of wealth, we're seeing growing homelessness, we've got people who can't afford to pay their bills, and they are working really hard. That's just outrageous. The previous national government sold down the electricity companies. They are rorting the system. The OECD report that just came out today identified that. I don't think you have to tell New Zealanders twice. They've been feeling it in their pockets. We've got to address some of the core components across our economy, but also across our society that are not moving in the right direction. We've got to have hope. We should, I think, develop a vision for our country that we can all share and understand, and then get on with it. And I think Labour, because we are built on the cooperative values, is in the best position, it's the best party to lead that direction that is the right one for our country.
Fantastic. There we go. That brings us to an end. Thank you very much for coming, Damien O'Connor.
Look, thank you very much for having me, and I think that a fora like this and media like this is what we need to see right through the election, and where people can ask, of each and every one of us, why you're in the job, why you're aspiring to be an MP, and they can make their judgments. But if we think carefully rather than just react, we'll have a better country.
Yeah, and you can tell it's election season, It's not often you meet someone for the first time and they're frog march into the studio for a marathon session like this, but it's been good fun to have this lovely chat with you. And we're all looking forward to the release of that manifesto sometime after the budget. We're all looking forward.
You read it carefully, and I'm sure you'll be inspired. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Gad, what an enigma. Every day the horizon of our imagination grows. I can't wait for tomorrow. You can find more episodes of the Almey Alternative on oar.org.nz, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. See you soon, dear listeners.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.